How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today we're going to be talking about the Amityville Harvest from 2020. So yeah, a 2020 movie, but not as rare for the direct-to-video circuit as it has been for the theaters as of late. But hey, 2020 movie. This is directed by Thomas J. Churchill and stars Kyle Lowder and Sadie Katz. And as you can tell from the title, the Amityville Harvest, this is the latest in the unofficial Amityville movies. For those of you who don't know, the original Amityville Horror was about a family that moves into a haunted house where in the past a guy had murdered his whole family, his parents and his brothers and sisters, and they feel haunted by the force that drove him to do this. Now, the town of Amityville is obviously a real location, making it public domain. The original murders are a true story, making that public domain, but the specifics of the people that moved in afterwards, as told to Jay Anston in the novel, and later adapted to film, those specifics are the only thing that are copyrighted, as well as the depictions of them in the movie. So, the original murders and the town are something that anyone can touch, and you can just set a movie in Amityville, and then in turn, you put in your title. And this is kind of one of those movies where there are 3 establishing shots that show either a building or a sign that says Amityville on it, so you know that it's set in Amityville, and now they can call it the Amityville Harvest. In fact, one of the characters talks about Montauk briefly. I'm kind of wondering if this movie was originally set there, and then a distributor said, hey, we need to sell more copies, shoot these insert shots, and say that it's set in Amityville now, so Amityville Harvest. This is actually a Lionsgate that put it out. They're a little bit bigger of a company than what normally does this, although this is really low budget, so I think they probably just did the distribution. But I would expect, like, say, the Asylum to do something like this. But anyway, yeah, so not very Amityville-y for those of you who are interested in that, but I just kind of collect these because I think the concept's interesting. Anyway, I'm going to be doing a fair review for this. A lot of channels really like to tear into and make fun of low-budget movies, and to be fair, this does have lots of flaws. I'm not going to do any sort of tear-down review. I'm also not going to be giving it blind praise. I'm going to be doing a fair review where we look at the pros and the cons. We're going to start off with talking a little bit about the plot. No spoilers, but I do want to give you an idea as to what this movie is about. You get this girl. She's at a funeral home, and she's the last one with the deceased. She goes to leave only to find that she's been locked in the funeral home while a few mysterious figures come out and chase her. It's actually a pretty cool sequence and a good opening for this movie. We cut to a little bit later, and you get this girl who is the host and presumably the producer, I'm not exactly sure, of this show called My Civil War Story, where they interview people that know about their family's Civil War stories, and it's a more personal take on it. They get to do this interview with this guy named Vincent Miller, and he says his great-great-grandfather knew, what's his name? John Wilkes Booth, and that he has a new take on the assassination. So that's a pretty cool concept right there. They go to do the interview, and it's in the house right next to the funeral parlor. You see Vincent Miller actually owns the funeral parlor as well. And it's a cool, creepy house. They go in it and they start doing the interview. But there's, of course, some technical problems with the camera as well as them encountering otherworldly problems. And it gets to be a cool, haunted movie. And as you can tell probably from the front with the vampire fangs, and it's pretty obvious early in the movie, Vincent Miller is actually a vampire. And I do want to say, this is a cool cover. It looks like it's steel with the image etched into it, but they specifically say in this movie that crosses don't work against this vampire, and the front cover is them holding a cross up to it, so it doesn't exactly work, but it still looks cool. But anyway, yeah, they go and they do an interview with the vampire. That could be its own movie, huh? Anyway, the interview obviously doesn't go as planned, and all the members of the crew are subject to spooky hauntings and whatnot. Let's go into the pros. The main guy who's the vampire in this movie does a good job at portraying the classic suave vampire. It's granted a performance that we had seen a lot before. We're all familiar with this type of vampire. But it's a case of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it's a good job there. The setting is really good in this movie. A classic Victorian house, very cool and creepy looking. I have to say, if you like cool old houses, this does have a really good one. And the third one, this movie does have good secondary villains. You get the vampire, obviously, but there's some cool Civil War ghost. An old lady who's, I'm not sure if she's a ghost or a vampire, but she has this big smile, and you'll see her in some of the thumbnails to the trailer for this movie. And you also get a mad doctor running around who's, working primarily for the funeral parlor, but of course on the side is going to be killing people. But yeah, some cool secondary characters. So the villains worked out pretty well, although some of the secondary ones were a little underutilized, and it's a cool setting. And the concept of a vampire who's been around long enough, he has a cool Civil War story, and the fact that he has a whole little operation with other people, it's overall a solid start. But we're going to get into the cons, and this movie does fall victim to several low-budget movie trappings that you see all over the place if you watch low-budget horror movies. First of all, the characters. There's no clear main character, and while a story can work without a clear main character, you do need to be able to get behind them and understand who they are and have a way to relate to them. And a lot of these characters, other than their job and, say, a vague personality, you don't really know them. Like, okay, that one's kind of ditzy, that one's funny. But other than just vague things like that and what they do, you don't really get to know these characters super well. The main character, I guess, would have to be the lady who's the host and the producer. But again, other than the fact that she's kind of serious and professional and the fact that she's the host and producer, I don't really know too much about her. A good example of not knowing too much about her, the first time you see her, she does a phone conversation. She talks to this other blonde lady, and they talk about getting the interview. Now, she begins the phone conversation by saying to this other blonde lady, "Hey, babe," and I assume from there, they're overly affectionate towards each other, and they live together. I'm like, oh, okay, your main character's a lesbian, right? But then it goes to about halfway through the movie, like a long time, I'm not exactly sure when, and you find out that this other blonde lady is actually her sister. That's a major plot point, and they didn't really make it clear. They're really affectionate towards each other, and she keeps calling her babe. Like, what am I supposed to assume? Like, at the end, I felt like if this is your main character, you need to have it a little more clear who she is and her relation to the auxiliary characters. Like, the fact that her parents died and she's trying to support her younger sister, that's a good character motivation and detail. But again, until about halfway through the movie, it wasn't clear that that's what this was, and it's your main character. It should be clearer, The other characters, there's actually two of them that are working on the crew, but they're secretly trying to investigate the woman that went missing in the prologue. These could be cool main characters. They have a hidden agenda as opposed to everyone else, a clear goal. You want to find the missing person, and it's something we can relate to. But you don't really know them super well at all. In fact, for the longest time, it's not clear why they're looking for the missing person. I assumed it was going to be that they were family members, like her brother or something. But then you find out he's doing this professionally. He's a detective. But you don't find that out till literally right near the end of his plot. And it's like, I, again, don't know these characters. The one character that I could kind of relate to was this guy named Otis, who they needed a last-minute replacement. He comes in. he's more down to earth, and he doesn't really relate too well to these overly serious Hollywood types that are way too into their profession. He's really cool and he's relatable. He's the only one I felt like I could actually, care about as a character. And of course, he's one of the first ones to go. So, yay. The other problem, the scares in this movie. A lot of them really don't work. For example, there's one character, he's sitting on a bench and he's slowly approached by these Civil War ghosts, and then he's killed, and when he's killed it looks like a Ghost Adventures transition where it's really jump cutty and flashy. And the thing is though, that it wasn't really super scary. You see, they were trying to make the scare itself the scary part, when in reality the build-up is way more important. I recently streamed on Amazon Prime this movie called Peeping Tom, which is considered by many, including Wes Craven, to be the first slasher movie. And there's one of the later kills in this movie where you see all the build-up, this guy talking to a woman he's going to kill, and the scene ends with him standing over her, still living, but you know what's going to come next, and then it fades away to the next scene. They didn't even show the scary part, but it was still scary because of the build-up, and that was really important. And here, it tries to focus on the actual scares as the scary part, and in turn, sometimes ghosts jump out way too quickly, and it doesn't quite work. And also, you gotta be honest with yourself if something actually comes off as scary when you're making a movie. There's one scene where a character's having a dream that another character's coming in to seduce him, and then he wakes up and he's on top of a couple big pillows, and I'm like, that's not really scary. That's kind of funny that you wake up on top of a bunch of pillows. It's supposed to be scary. It didn't work. And then of course, you get appearance from bad CGI that's pretty standard in low budget movies. The vampire has a weird shadow aura that kind of shoots out of him, and it always looks like it's on top of the film and never in it. And it's just these weird little black lines. And of course we get our old friend, bad CGI blood that does appear from time to time in here. So you gotta look at that as well. Another big problem, this movie does suffer from something I refer to as low budget movie logic, where scenes just don't make sense. The sound guy is getting bad sounds. He either doesn't hear the vampire or hears other ghostly voices. They're doing an interview. An interview, sound is literally the most important thing. You could do just sound if you wanted to. He's going, hey guys, the sound's all messed up, and for some reason they just keep filming, and then they get to the end of the interview and they're like, what? The sound's all messed up? No, don't keep filming. Take care of the sound before you waste this guy's time. But there's that. There's another scene later in the movie where the characters open the door to the room they're in, and every door they open is replaced by bricks. A little bit Looney Tunes, but overall a fun enough concept. They open the door, they're all bricks. How do you get out? Well, the scene ends with them going, let's get out of here, and walking out of frame, and then the next scene opens with them opening the door to a different room and just walking into that. I'm like, how'd they get out of that last room? The whole problem was that it was all bricks and they couldn't leave. And just low budget movie logic like that. But anyway, it's not great. The big film critics among you aren't gonna like it, and the average movie fan isn't. But I don't want to dish on this too hard. It had a cool concept and some cool villains, and it wasn't boring, and that was one thing. A lot of these movies, they drag way too long, and they get really boring. If anything, this movie cuts a little bit abruptly, and maybe goes a little bit too fast at times, and at least it wasn't boring, and it had some cool monsters, so it wasn't terrible. But at the end of the day, I'd only recommend this to people like me that for some reason watch way too much low-budget horror movies. This is better than a lot of them. There's a lot of low-budget horror movies that are just boring and they don't go anywhere, but this actually does have something to it. But again, not great. But I'd also, if you're the Amityville people that are just going to show up every single time, there's Amityville, yeah, you're going to show up to this anyway. But yeah, if you're the low-budget horror movie crowd, this is better than a lot of the micro-budget horror, but don't expect the world from it. But overall, fine, but really not great and not going to appeal to the wider audience. But hey, an Amityville vampire movie, you don't see that every day. Anyway, to everyone who's watched so far, thank you for watching, and to everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you, really are helping out the channel. I do about 95% horror on here, so if that sounds like something you're interested in, I'd recommend checking, sticking around. I'll put a relevant playlist down here, and have a good day, and I'll see you guys again very, very soon.